Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is Listening Beyond the Soundbites. We are talking again tonight about a subject that we've covered a few times, about wake boats. And I have two guests with me tonight, one by Zoom, Diane Lehder. Did I pronounce that right, Diane?
No, it's Lehder, but that's okay.
I was close. Lehder. Sorry,
I've been
Diane.
called a lot of things in my life.
I understand. And joining me in studio is Dave Kidney, and now Dave is representing Joe's Pond, which is a great pond to be at, and Diane is representing Lake Willoughby. And we're going to talk about wake boats because there have been petitions filed with DEC to not permit wake boats on 10 lakes here in Vermont, and they just had public hearings last week.
Tuesday and Thursday last week, or Wednesday and Thursday.
Right. So we're going to talk about that, and I want you all to remember, if you don't listen to the whole show, you need to know that if you want to comment and submit your thoughts to DEC, you have to do it by December 23rd, correct?
Correct.
So please listen to that, remember that date, because it's important. You've got to be part of the discussion. So welcome, both of you. I appreciate your being on. This is as you are very interested in this, so am I. Drives me crazy. And we've done, as Diane was on the radio with me, and we've done two shows, I think, here on this subject. So we know a little bit, but you guys are in the mud, right? So maybe can you talk a little bit, Dave, about the filings and the petitions and what we're looking at here?
Yes. So Responsible Wakes Vermont Lakes,
right,
filed a petition. I think it was 2 years ago, and there were hearings on it and comments, and they came up with a new rule, and that rule was that any lake that had an area of 50 contiguous acres or more, in water 20 feet deep or more, and that was 500 feet from shore or more, that they were going to have an eligible wake sports zone. And I think out of the 73 inland lakes, I think 30 qualified under those rules.
Right.
But the A&R essentially invited individual lakes to file petitions for their lake. And probably one of the main parts about that is the A&R acknowledged in looking at the Responsible Wake petition,
right,
that they did not consider safety. And they said, we will consider it when and if individual lakes petition. So I think as a result of that, and as a result of, well, I know on Joe's Pond, and I think I speak for the other lakes, thinking that the rule did not go far enough, a number of lakes petitioned, filed individual petitions to prohibit wake sports or wake boats on their individual lakes.
right.
And Lake Willoughby is one of them, and Joe's Pond is one. Two lakes that are both in the Northeast Kingdom.
Yeah, I'll read the lake list for you just so you've got a good idea. It's Caspian Lake, Echo Lake in Charleston, Great and Little Avery Lakes, I love that, Lake Fairley, Shadow Lake in Glover, Waterbury Reservoir, and I must comment, Eric Chittenden wanted to join us because he's very involved with the group that's dealing with the Waterbury Reservoir, but he wasn't able to tonight. Parker Lake in Glover, and Lake Willoughby and Joe's Pond, and that's the list. So if you are involved with any of those lakes, please pay attention here. So maybe we could talk, and maybe Diane, how can you explain to people who are listening what a wake boat is, because they are big?
They are. Let me first just clarify that out of 30 lakes in the state that are eligible for wake boats and wake sports, 10 lakes, a third of them are petitioning out.
Right.
And most of these, I think only 2 of them are petitioning to prohibit wake boats entirely, and they're lakes that have not had them on their surface. But the others, like Willoughby, are only petitioning to prohibit wake sports, so that nobody can claim we're trying to take their boats. Wake boats are really interesting. They tend to be large. They have some very distinctive features. They're power boats, and they're designed to create large wakes. We're talking 3 to 5 feet, which is unlike the wakes that most ski boats put out. They're used so that people can surf behind these boats without a tow rope. They also do a lot of acrobatics. They tend to have deep hulls. They have hundreds of horsepower, 500, 600, 700 horsepower on these lakes. They have very expensive audio systems if you like music. And ski boats can be altered, with some various appendages so that they can create these wakes as well. But one thing that ski boats don't have that wake boats do have incorporated into the design are these multi-thousand-gallon ballast tanks.
Right.
So that when a wake boat goes out with the purpose of engaging in wake sports, they take on thousands of gallons of water from the lake. And when they're done and leave the lake surface, they discharge that water back into the lake. And the problem is that even when fully discharged, these ballast tanks still contain several gallons of water. The wake boat enthusiasts will tell you that it's minimal. It's not to be, you're not to be concerned about that. But it's interesting that the wake boat manufacturers advise their buyers that there is sufficient water that they should be adding marine antifreeze to their tanks in the winter. So there are gallons left in there. And there was a study I just came across the other day that someone forwarded to me that actually the problem is that aquatic invasive species can be in this
Right.
water. So when I take my boat from Willoughby to Joe's Pond and I load it up again and I discharge it, I could share my milfoil or whatever else I
Right.
might have in the lake with you, David. Not necessarily being a good neighbor. This particular study was conducted in 1918, how about 2018 in Minnesota, concluded that wake boat ballast tanks were the best way for zebra mussels to get from one lake to another.
Right. There's been a lot
So
written about that.
there has been.
Yeah.
It's a major concern.
Yep. Wow. That and you just can't, as you said, you can't empty them out totally. There's always water left, and it's a great place to bring these. Everybody knows about zebra mussels here in Vermont, Eurasian water milfoil, and spiny water fleas. Do not look that up. I looked up what they are. Pretty ugly. That's a scary thing.
One thing I would add, and I think Diane gave a great description of wake boats, but I think it's important. So as she described it, the ballast tank. So Joe's Pond, for instance, has one of the oldest and one of the best inspection programs in the state. In fact, my kids work there, and they're now, they
right.
have kids of their own.
Yeah.
So it's been around a long time, and they can inspect the exterior of a boat. So if you come in with your kayak or motorboat and it's got milfoil stuck to the prop or to the side, Eurasian milfoil, an invasive species, they can see it and tell you to, don't enter here until that's cleaned off. They cannot inspect the inside of a ballast tank. And if that ballast tank, and Diane is correct, has a few gallons of water in it,
Right.
and they've been in Lake Champlain, which has a ton of Eurasian milfoil, and they come to Joe's Pond with it, our inspectors have no way of being able to spot that and stop it. So I think that, and the other issue, I think, since we're talking about environmental issues, when they fill up the ballast tank, so a normal motorboat runs like this.
Right.
It planes. You've been, they start like this, they go faster and they
Yep,
plane.
right.
And they run like this. So their prop is pushing the water kind of laterally,
Yep, right.
perpendicular to the bottom, or parallel to the bottom, rather. A wake boat with its ballast, it puts the
Goes
boat
that,
like
right,
this.
Right,
The prop is facing directly down, and that's what's creating the huge wakes. But what's happening is the prop is like an egg beater on the bottom of the pond.
right, just
And
stirring
it's
it up.
stirring up. So Vermont lakes, we're a farm state. There's a lot of dormant phosphates. There's nothing wrong with dormant phosphate. It sits there and doesn't do any harm. The prop of these stirs that dormant phosphate up, and dormant phosphate feeds toxic cyanobacteria, otherwise known as blue-green algae.
Ah,
It's a
deadly, right,
It's what
to dogs.
closes the beaches at Lake
Yep,
Carmi every
right.
summer, Lake Champlain. And so there's a number, and we can talk about even more, but there's a number of huge, serious negative environmental impacts from these boats. And we'd be happy to talk about that more
yeah.
if you
Well, I
want.
think this is, I've always been surprised when you're talking about safety and the way the boat is angled. They were even talking about how you can't see well.
Another good,
I mean,
another good point.
You could run over a whole bunch of folks without even having a clue because you can't see in front of you like a regular boat.
You're right.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yes, I'm very big on safety and because it should be fun to be out there and you shouldn't have to worry about anything. But the pictures that we showed on the first video about what happens when everything gets churned up and what it ruins, it's very, very scary, I think.
Right, and as
Yeah.
Vermont spends millions of dollars a year trying to keep phosphate out of lakes.
Yep,
And now we let wake boats
yeah, stir it up.
just stir this.
Excellent.
It's like, right, it's just, we're spending millions to not let phosphate come into the water, and now we have these boats that
stir it up.
release it from the
That's
bottom
right.
of the lakes.
Whatever, Diane, and whatever happened
Kathy,
to the home rule issue? Speaking of boats going back and forth, wasn't there a discussion early on about home rule? Where is that these days?
Oh man,
Gone?
that's a big issue. It was a great idea.
Yeah.
Boats declare a home lake and they're supposed to stay in that lake for the season. They get a sticker.
Right.
And if they choose to go someplace else, they are required to go to a certified decontamination station, which uses hot water to flush out the ballast tanks.
Right.
And they receive a certificate of decontamination. So if the boats from Joe's Pond are coming over to us on Willoughby, they should be decontaminated.
Right.
Our greeters should see that certificate. In theory, it works. This year, we had no certified decontamination stations except the 5 on Lake Champlain, and those are dedicated to boats entering and leaving Champlain. So instead, the DEC said, well, we're not going to declare home lakes. We don't have stickers. We're going to work on the honor system. So if you want to move a boat from one lake to another, you will keep it out of the water for 14 days so the ballast tanks dry thoroughly before you enter another lake. But this is strictly on the honor
Right,
system.
right.
And just particular concern for Willoughby because of where we're located way up by the border. We have always attracted a lot of tourists from Canada.
Yeah.
That's the number of Canadian plates has always been very, very large. And wakeboat owners are discovering that they can launch in Vermont for free. And they may be asked to pay as much as $120 a day to launch at lakes in Canada. Some lakes are totally private in Canada, but they have a raft of invasive species that we do not have in Vermont. So we are particularly vulnerable
Right.
to everything that's coming across the border, not to be unfriendly, but Vermont and these communities, lake communities, have spent an inordinate amount of money and hours trying to prevent or control what we have. and don't want.
So is DEC going to establish a home rule place
It's
where you
still
can
on the
go?
books. It's still on the books. We don't know what they're planning for 25, 24. It didn't work.
Right, that's not good, because we did a lot of discussion about the impacts of not having a home rule, and now we're seeing it, because even though it's on the honor system, we sort of know how that works.
Well, and you guys they just found milfoil, right, David?
Yeah,
In Joe's Pond?
Vermont, again, it was having one of the oldest and we think best inspection programs in the state. We've been free of milfoil, but late this August, it was discovered for the first time.
Really?
And
In Joe's Pond, you're saying?
Joe's
Oh, wow.
Pond, yeah.
And what did one do with
you know,
that?
so this issue, you know, is near and dear and
For sure.
very serious to Joe's Ponders' hearts and everybody who loves the pond.
I bet.
And I just point out, it's not just the people who live on the pond. On our petition, the Cabot Select Board unanimously voted to be co-petitioners.
Wow.
The Danville Select Board unanimously voted to be co-petitioners. So the two idyllic towns where Joe's Pond is situated,
Right.
they're saying to the A&R, prohibit wake sports on Joe's Pond.
Right.
It's not just the camp owners, it's the people, the neighbors who like to kayak there and paddleboard there and like to fish there.
Right.
And all these folks
And
have joined. So it's a real community effort.
Yeah.
It's every organization in that area is saying no wake sports on Joe's Pond.
And our idyllic ponds are what attracts tourists.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, I mean, they want to come here fish and enjoy the atmosphere and the outdoors. I mean, that's really. So let's talk a little bit about the hearings, because Diane, you said before we started videotaping that it was much different this time than the first one that I didn't participate,
Yeah.
but I listened in. And I must say, back then there were 300 people on Zoom and standing room only in the meetings. Were you at that one? That was amazing.
I was up at the Greensboro meeting,
Okay.
right? And you're right, it was a large.
It was huge. I was
Huge.
very surprised. I was pleased, but surprised. So Diane, tell us a little bit about what you saw and heard at this one.
I would be delighted. I've been doing environmental stuff for the past 60 years, so these hearings are not new to me. And I'm always impressed with the preparation that people do to share their remarks and their thoughts. We saw that in the earlier hearings during the evaluation phase, the public input phase for the initial rule. But I felt these two hearings last week, and I listened to every minute of the 8 hours, were remarkable. Not because people were saying anything necessarily that hadn't been said before, but I have never seen a public hearing in which people expressed the passion that they did during those 8 hours. I was glued to my seat. If I thought I was going to be bored and, do some email during the course of the meetings, that did not happen. What you had were largely people who had whose families had spent decades or generations on a lake, and they were passionate about preserving what brought them and their family there for the next generations. The passion was palpable. Let me just put it that way.
Great. Well, and they've had experience. The law went into effect, and they've seen what happens on their lakes when the wake boats are there, correct? And I have to say, last time when we talked about this, here's the list I have of what we talked about. Shoreline erosion, stirring up of sediment, as you just talked about, and they don't, I was going to say, they don't play well with other boats. It says they don't cohabitate but dominate, because they sort of take over where they are. There was a proposed 1,000 feet from the shore, but that was cut way back. And they didn't want it deeper than 20 feet. Now they're looking, you said, at 30 possibly, right?
Well, as you asked before we went on air, you pointed out to me there's a new study out of Connecticut.
Right.
And this outfit, which was, I wish, and Diane might know the name of them, Triage, something, but
Yeah.
they were the ones that DEC and the ANR relied on at first to say that the water had to be 20 feet or deeper. But they've now, on further studies, they've concluded that even at 26 feet, it's not safe to have a wake boat, that it's stirring up the bottom, churning up the bottom of the lakes. And because of this rule of a conservative rule, I think Responsible Wakes is now saying it should be 30 feet deep.
Right.
Because there's scientific studies that show even at 26 feet, but 20 is not deep enough,
Right.
is what the new studies are showing. Studies by the same outfit that the DEC and ANR have already accepted
I didn't know
as
that
reliable.
part.
You might have the name of
Yeah,
the
it's called
outfit there.
Terra Vigilis Environmental Service Group, and they are, we're looking at Lake, Waramagog?
Yeah, that's in a part of Connecticut,
Connecticut.
northwest Connecticut,
Yes.
near Kent.
Yep, right in west central Connecticut. So, and it's a very, it looks like a very comprehensive report. It went on for pages, and I'm looking forward to reading it. So there, we were talking about the hearings. Do you think it made an impact on the A&R folks? I mean, were they listening?
I'm surprised, Pat, when you go over your list there from your earlier discussions. You talked about not cohabitating, but dominating. But the word safety is not there in your list.
Right.
And safety is one of the major concerns about wake sports on our lakes. In evaluating, I believe, 759 comments from the public during the initial rulemaking phase, DEC acknowledged that they did not have on-staff experts in safety, and therefore they did not consider safety during the rulemaking phase coming up with what we have now, but that they would consider that as they went forward with individual petitions. There is, the DEC issued a report on incidents that were reported to the state this summer between wake sports and other users on the lakes. And essentially, there were none. There were a handful. But that's not surprising, because what we heard from people at the hearings, and I would say the vast majority of people who spoke mentioned personal experiences with these wakes on their lakes, either their own personal experiences or experiences that friends had shared with them. And what they said were that they are either moving off the water if they're on the water when the wake sports begin, or they are not going out if the wake boats are out. But clearly, I think this is less an indication that there were not incidents, but that people were making it, people were taking precautions so that they were not personally involved in incidents. I thought it was very interesting, and my daughter picked up on this right away. She happens to be a data person, and she was quoting from a criminal justice study, and I'm just looking for this number here. Something like 40% or 30 or 40%, only 30 or 40% of crimes, whether they be property crimes or injury crimes, are even reported. So it's not surprising that we didn't get many reports. And the other big issue in the state is we have no enforcement. So while, the intent is to have a rule and to have it be obeyed, we don't have any means of enforcing that.
Right.
And people don't even bother to call. They don't even look for who they should call. And that's just the reality.
Yeah, I'm surprised, we talked before the show, that there is a division in public safety. that are responsible. They've got boats, they've got a whole group of folks that are on at least Lake Champlain for sure, and, you know, looking at safety and making sure people are not under the influence when they're driving boats. And I would think that they would know and be able to help DEC with safety issues. That's what they do. And
Well,
so I don't think they look too far.
if we wait until there are enough incidents reported to indicate we have a problem on Vermont lakes, it will be too late.
Yeah.
There will be too many wake boats on our lakes. There will be an embedded base that will fight this bitterly. Right now, wake boats are less than 5% of
Right.
the boats that are registered.
Right.
But there are very credible studies from other lakes where they have years of experience with these boats. And we need to rely on those data to inform our decision. The problem is real.
Well, now you've got individual petitions, so now they are going to look at safety, right? That's what they said. So who are they bringing in to look at safety? Do they have someone or an entity of sorts to look at this issue? Because you can't have these boats without the safety factor included. It makes no sense.
Have you heard, David? I have not.
No, I have not, but I would like to echo what Diane said, just in terms of, like, I know on Joe's Pond, like, I have a small sailboat, a 14.5-foot day sailor, and Joe's Pond has had sunfish races, the Caledonia Cup, you know,
Right. Oh, right.
for eons, I mean, forever. And, you know, I've been out in my sailboat, and I'm a experienced sailor. I've sailed since I was a child, and just about been capsized by a wake.
Wow.
And I think of my grandkids who are learning to sail. If it had been them, they would have gone over.
Right.
But I think what's happened on Joe's Pond, and I think everywhere else, is exactly what Diane said. So at Joe's, the wake zone, the eligible zone, I don't know if you know Joe's very well, but it's kind of a narrow lake, but down by the boat access is the broad, deep part of the lake. There's a 90-foot hole there.
Wow.
But it's the most popular part of the lake. Kids love to swim there. They wait until the depth finder says 90 feet. And it's like, here's where we want to swim.
Right.
And they swim. It's much more exciting than swimming in 20 feet for them somehow. Sailors like it because it's the only place you can have a long tack. Sailors have to, you're in the narrow part, you get a short little, you're going back and forth.
Right.
But here you get a long tack before you have to turn. Anglers like it because they like to fish in the deep waters. But that's our zone. So what's happened is it's been usurped by wake boats, because if you're on shore, as Diane said, and you're about to go out in a kayak, paddle boat, canoe, sailboat, a little aluminum fishing boat, you see them out there, you stay home. You stay back at camp. If you're out there and they come, you head home. So this tiny niche sport has, I can't remember what your words were, but they dominate, they preclude
Right.
the traditional normal uses that people have enjoyed for generations. And that's not fair. That's
No,
not
right,
equitable.
Right.
It's not an equitable use of Vermont waters.
Yeah, can I talk a little bit about our wake boat zone? You saw my quote in Digger about the fact that just because Willoughby's big doesn't make it suitable for wake sports. Willoughby is long, about 5 miles long. It's about a mile wide at its widest. And our wake boat zone runs about 4.5 miles all the way down the lake. That leaves a 500-foot perimeter around the lake where it's supposedly safe for other people to enjoy what we call normal uses, swimming, kayaking,
Right.
whatever. The reality is that those people are getting buffeted in those areas, and certainly nobody's going to sail in 500 feet. Most of the wake boaters on our lake were very observant about getting out into the wake boat zone before they ramped up, which was a good thing. And a lot of the activity is along the southwest corner of the lake, which is all state forest. It's steep, it's rocky. It's difficult to get out of the water if you needed to. The cell phone coverage is bad if you needed help. The steep drop-offs along the edges of the lake in that area amplify the power of the deep wave action. And that also happens to be a spot where many, many paddleboarders congregate. We have a lot of paddleboarding on the lake. In fact, non-motorized activity, recreation far outnumbers what happens with motorboats. And because we have a vendor down there at the South End camp that rents paddle equipment, we have a lot of novices down there, and those are the people that are most vulnerable.
Right.
If you go down there any day and you look at these people, they have coolers on their paddle boards. They have coffee mugs. Sometimes they have dogs.
Yeah.
It was reported someone had a young child out there. They are not prepared to be dumped by these wakes.
Right.
Very unsafe, very dangerous.
Well, I guess I just wanted to follow up on the question I asked before. So it doesn't sound like DEC is going to be looking at safety with these petitions?
They say they are. They
are,
say that's
but-
why they invited these petitions. Is this time? This
okay.
time they're going to look at safety.
I hope they bring somebody in who can do that, has the expertise for that.
Right.
Because
They can look at the studies.
yeah. And I'm also surprised, Diane, the article I found in the paper that started my question, it read, Vermont DEC to hold 2 public meetings on petitions to ban wake boats on 10 individual lakes. And they are misleading because you just said that there are only 2 lakes that are looking to have them banned, right?
I would have to go back, Pat, and count. I know Averill is looking to prohibit the boats altogether, and I believe that's also true for Caspian.
Caspian as well.
Caspian.
Are they the only 2, David, or are there more? I don't recall.
I think they are, but just to be clear, as Diane said, so a wake boat, if it doesn't fill its ballast, if it's running like this,
Right.
and they want to go for a cruise or pull a tuber or pull a water skier, on Joe's Pond, on Willoughby, if our petitions are granted, they can still do that. So they don't have to sell their boat. They can
Right.
use it for, a
sports
cocktail
boat, right.
cruise or tubing or
Right.
water skiing. But they will not be able to fill their ballast, turn the boat this way, and create those huge waves. So that's why Joe's Pond elected, and it sounds like Willoughby did, and the other two,
Exactly.
to ban wake surfing,
I see.
wake sports.
Wake sports.
Right. They did say wake sports in a lot of the articles, so that makes
Well, that's
sense.
correct then. They got
Because,
it.
when you read the headline, it's very misleading, because I thought, wow, 10 lakes, banning them would be, because I was very impressed when the Responsible Wakes for Vermont Lakes people, they didn't want to ban, as you didn't want to ban the sport because they recognized it's a sport. And I think it's got some economic impact in Vermont with the prices of these boats. There could bring in a few dollars to our coffers, but
I
not,
think the impact on whole will be negligible, because
Really?
what will happen is we will lose, the people on paddleboards, and we will lose the
well,
people.
right.
They're already talking. There are people around our lake that are talking about going elsewhere.
Huh.
So, those people come and spend money too. And if you have 2 or 3 families on a lake with
Right.
wake
Good
boats,
point.
they're not spending enough to compensate.
Right.
Yeah, and
That's-
I'd just like to
That's a good
really
point.
emphasize what Diane said. I think if you read the petitions, the negative economic impact is not prohibiting wake sports on these 10 ponds and lakes. That's why, I mean, you know, Danville, Cabot, they're concerned about economic interest.
Interesting.
They're concerned about, you know, that's what select board
Right.
look at.
Right.
And the vast majority of people who come to Joe's Pond, you know, our boat access is right off Route 2.
Right.
Or coming to kayak and paddleboard and fish.
Right.
If they look out and right in front of them is a wake boat and they don't come there anymore.
Right.
Now they're not stopping at Hastings store
Right.
to you know, to buy a sandwich or get an ice cream
Or
when
pottery.
they're done. Right,
Yeah.
right, or they're not driving
right.
driving down
Yeah.
to Marty's
Right.
and people are worried about, you know, it's speculative, but if you degrade the lake environmentally,
Yeah,
I mean, we've
forget it.
seen this up on Lake Champlain up in
Right.
Franklin County, the property values, and now you're affecting the tax
That's
rates
true.
of these towns. Not the tax rates, but the amount of tax income they bring in. So I think economically, it's going to be shown that the smartest thing to do is to prohibit wake
Interesting.
sports on these ponds. That it's going to be an economic negative to do otherwise.
Well, not that I'm good to hear that, but
David, you bring up
yes,
you
go
bring
ahead.
up you bring up property values. I think it was UVM that did one or two studies where they looked at issues like water quality, and they were absolutely able to document how these property values were impacted. And, you know, I know that when we talked to our town treasurer in Westmore about this, and what he explained to us is if the property values around the lake itself are depressed for some reason, for example, if we got AIS that caused a problem or, you know, blue-green algae, and if our property values around the lake were depressed, that it would be the other properties away from the lake that would be shouldering a greater burden
Right.
Right.
for the tax revenues than they do presently. And those are the people who tend to be year-round residents and you know, less able to support those increased taxes. So yeah, the impact will be very large.
Interesting. It was a different discussion during the first videotaping about economics, but I guess over time, we've seen what people do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I personally wouldn't want to be on a lake with wake boats because I sort of like the serenity of it all, and I don't think that fits with wake boats.
Oh, I think that's huge. I mean, I think a lot of people who enjoy, you know, again, I can speak mostly to Joe's, but I think it's true of other places as well. We have nesting loons. We've got blue herons. We
right.
have eagles. We have good fishing. And Eric Hansen, the loon biologist, he testified at the hearing about just the fact that the water's not, you don't have the water clarity. It makes it harder for these birds to fish.
Oh, sure, because it's all churned up.
Right. So, and people want to be at Willoughby and
Right,
Joe's because
right.
they're jewels, and they want, you know, we just the last couple of years have had cyanobacteria, these blue-green blooms, right in the cove that's adjacent to this area. You know, God help us if they spread.
Right.
I mean, look what's happened to Lake Carmi. And,
Yes, right.
So to preserve the health of these bodies of water, you know, it's like we have to do that. You know, I mean, we've talked about how long, you know, so my wife's family has been on Joe's Pond since the 50s. Wow. Her grandmother, then her parents, she spent her whole summers there. My kids, the day after school until the day before school were there.
Right.
Now my grandkids. There's a lot of people like that. And even the newcomers. I mean, regardless of how, it's like you want to preserve this jewel.
Right. Do you think that that they really heard this and if they were speaking passionately, this must have all come out about family and tradition and it must have been very emotional.
This is the passion, Pat, that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It was interesting. One of the articles that was written talked about how each lake seemed to come at it from a different angle. And it would be helpful for you to understand why. The petitions ask each lake to put forward what makes their lake unique or different
Right.
and perhaps deserving of further protection. And one of the distinguishing features about Willoughby is the fact that we were designated a national natural landmark in 1967. This is by the Department
Wow.
of Interior, and this is just 5 years after the program was instituted. It is interesting that today, which is almost 60 years later, there are only 12 designated sites in the state, and Willoughby is the only lake so designated. This is huge.
Huge.
This is absolutely huge. And, each story, each lake has a story to tell. I was so impressed. Each lake was given 10 minutes to present an overview of its petition, and I know we got pretty wordy on ours, and I think Caspian's was over 1,100 pages long, including
1,100? You've got to be
yeah, I think
kidding.
1,151. That included appendices. I think we were only at 104 or 107. But the stories that each lake told, and sometimes it was about water quality, and ours was about this national landmark status,
Right.
and Averill's was about the fact that they're a true wilderness experience. Each story, each lake had a story to tell, and I sat there and I wondered how they could deny any of them.
Yep. Well, I know my reaction when you said before that DEC said that it would only look at safety when they get individual petitions, and I thought one size does not fit all with these boats. It just
No, it does not.
can't. And I don't understand why they chose. You just can't do that. You can't make a blanket rule and expect it to fit everywhere in Vermont. It just doesn't work that way.
It was interesting that someone from the marine industry did come and speak at the second hearing, asked that his comments be applied to all of the petitions. He had 2 minutes. He spent about 1:40 talking about the organizations that he represents and the size of the industry. And of course, he talked about the whole boating industry and the impact of that whole industry on the state. And I wondered what he was going to say, how he was going to counter what we had all put forth in support of our petitions. And he said, I said, you really should give this some time to see how well the current rule works. That was it.
I think they did, didn't they? I remember there was a guy from Michigan who moved here. Did you see that? He had left all this, and he came here and he goes, don't do it. And he fought like he was really involved in this discussion because he had lived it in Michigan and he didn't want any part of it here. He was great. Did you see that article?
I wonder if you're talking about Kim, and I can't remember his last name. He's up at Averill, and he comes to Averill, but he has a place, I think it's back in Michigan or wherever.
Right.
And that's where he uses his wake boat.
Yeah.
We also had one on Willoughby. Kim Finney, her family has a wake boat. It's now in a marina up in Newport, and they are selling it because they believe that though they're owners and enthusiasts, that Wakesports don't belong on Willoughby. And it was very interesting because she spoke right after her brother-in-law, who happens to be a great wakeboat enthusiast and wants them to stay. So the contrast was pretty
Right, there you
interesting.
go.
Yeah.
Well, I just remember that Michigan, they had a big picture of him, and he was very vocal. And I thought, well,
And
good for him.
eloquent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
excellent, excellent. He was wonderful.
I'd like to make 2 points. One, I really want to echo what Diane said. I think each lake is unique. I have been to most of them in my life over the course. I mean, I'm 70 years old. I like to kayak. I go to Willoughby a lot. I think Willoughby deserves its
Right,
landmark
right.
status. It's really one of the most beautiful places in the state. And I think all the lakes are rooting for each other, have been sharing information, have been working together,
Right.
because they realize that we found out what's unique about each of them through this process. Lake Fairleigh has all these summer camps where kids are learning to kayak, and they've got to deal with this. Waterbury Reservoir, somewhat like Averill, is kind of a wilderness experience for people in the more densely populated area of Washington and Chittenden County. But all the lakes are really rooting for each other. They want every petition to be granted because they've heard from their friends and neighbors on these other lakes and heard their stories and empathize.
Yes.
And the other point I'd just like to make is when I was listening to the gentleman from the manufacturers speak, I mean, one of the things we've always said is, like, people say, there's only one wake boat on your lake. There's only 2 on yours. There's only 3. What's the big deal? If we allow this, they will come.
Right.
I mean, originally there was only 1 paddleboard on our lake.
Yeah.
Now there's
Right.
150.
A gazillion, right?
I mean, now they're everywhere. And the manufacturers are building them bigger. The wakes are bigger.
How big, David? How big?
Big.
The gigaboat,
really big.
7-foot wakes, I think,
Really?
is what they're advertising.
Right. So you live down
Like
in
Hawaii.
Boston. You live down in Boston,
Yeah.
and you want to camp, and you're a wakeboat enthusiast. You're going to pick a place that they allow it.
Right.
And Joe's Pond allows it. Let's come there. So maybe we only have 2 now. If this becomes permanent, if we don't prohibit them, there's going to be more and more and more. And the manufacturers basically say that. We're going to push these boats.
Sure.
We're going to sell them.
Yeah.
We're going to sell them.
Well, we're just a
David,
little state here. I don't know how we can do that.
Let me add just one more thought to that. And that's when you get more than one wakeboat in the same area. Depending on how they're going, their wakes, if they're running parallel, I believe, their wakes become additive. So if they're both putting out, a 2-foot wake, it
Right.
could become a 4-foot wave. And it's the energy and all this kind of stuff. And that particular thing, they've done some great controlled studies on how far these wakes go, because they run a single boat, they've got measurements, they do all this stuff. It's very scientific. But I don't think they've figured out yet how to study the impact of these multiple wakes combining and
Right.
crashing. But if you've been in the middle of a lake, when you get wakes from different boats of any kind coming together, it's serious chop. And when you have large wakes, I don't want to be out there. I don't want to be out there in a 19-foot boat.
Right. Well, and you were talking about your sailboat and your grandkids. I mean, how would they know to deal with that?
Right. And you want kids
Yeah, to
sailing
enjoy.
by 10 years old, a sunfish by themselves, or kayaking by themselves. And so, a friend of mine says he's scared when he's out there and a wake boat comes by.
Great.
God forbid it's a kid or an elderly person or a beginner who doesn't know to turn into the wake and take it, it's
Right.
it's scary.
Yeah, that is. Do you know what the next process is? They've asked for comments to be filed by December 23rd. Then they're going to take time, I presume, and then they have to go to LCAR, because this is a
They,
rule.
no,
They
no,
don't?
the next part of the process, Pat, the DEC staff will decide which petitions they recommend advancing. Got it?
Yeah,
And those petitions will go to Julie Moore,
yep,
the secretary of A&R,
yep.
and she will decide which, if any, and Laura DeLuca keeps saying, if any, move into the next phase, during which there will be more public hearings.
Oh, okay. Because I
Um,
wasn't sure, there's a process that makes
then,
these rules almost
then
like
they go,
law.
yeah, then they go to, I believe, ICAR
LCAR, okay,
before they go to LCAR.
yep,
And let me just add one more thought. The LCAR hearings on the initial rule were held in Montpelier last February.
right,
They might have started in January, but during February. And LCAR approved the rule because their job is to rule on whether the process has been followed in developing this rule. And they ruled that the process had been followed. But in doing so, they also said, and they sent letters to the two committees of jurisdiction, which are the environmental, I guess, committees in the House and the Senate, saying they did not believe that the rules had gone far enough. So, while the law was enacted, the regulations were enacted because the process had been followed, there is some question in the legislature as to whether or not we've gone far enough yet.
And when you mean far enough, to be as protective as possible, or?
Right.
Okay, because
That's right.
I read a summary of all of the petitions, and they said that lake associations collectively have said that the rule wasn't protective enough, and that's a very good word, protective, because
great.
and that includes
Yeah.
safety, and includes all the damage that's done. I know there was a picture of a, great, can't think of the dock, just going crazy, and
Yeah.
after and the little kids are there trying to manage being on a dock that's not standing still. Yeah.
I was reading something yesterday. And there was a quote from somebody, I don't recall who, and I'm sorry I can't give that to you. But they said that the purpose of government was to protect
Right.
its citizens, or certainly that is one major purpose of government. And I think that what people are saying is they don't feel that we've gone far enough to do that yet.
Right. Yeah, and I'm trying to remember, I think it's Caspian Lake they live on. I spoke to somebody who is supportive of the wake boats, and she was really adamant, just as passionate, that they should be allowed, and I was sort of arguing on the other side, and there's just so many details that have to be dealt with, with the depth and the amount of feet away from the shore. I mean, it's just goes on, and I hope this works out okay.
Yeah, well,
Because-
Caspian is prepared to take the next step, Pat.
Really?
From what was said the other night, I believe that they are either considering or poised to seek the authority from the state to control the lake, in which case it would be the town with the control that would then prohibit them. I don't know if that's ever
Really?
been
Wow.
done.
Yeah.
I've looked at the statute. I don't understand all the
Interesting.
ramifications or how it works, but there's something out there that they're looking to.
Oh, well, I'm going to have to check on that. That's great. You were saying there's no enforcement on the lakes. Is there no presence from state police on the lakes with these boats?
David, what do you have on
I mean,
Joe's Pond?
pretty minimal,
Pretty minimal?
right?
Yeah, and the locals don't have the wherewithal, I mean, they don't have the boats and stuff to do that, do they?
No, but I
thinking-
do want to say that it's pretty universally agreed on Joe's Pond that if our petition is granted, we're not worried about enforcement. We think that people will follow the law.
it, right,
I mean, I think what's hard to follow, so the wake boat zone's 500 feet,
right,
and on Joe's Pond, it's just 54 acres. So you're getting near the end of your zone,
Right.
but now there's a sailboat that has the right of way, a
Right.
kayak that has the right of way. Non-motorized vehicles have the right of way over motorized vehicles, which makes sense.
Right.
I can't turn my sailboat on a dime.
right,
So now you got a small zone or even a big zone. If you're approaching that thing, you got to avoid an accident. You're going to go outside the zone. When you're outside the zone, you're in shallow water. Even without the 26-foot rule,
Right.
you're now in water less than 20 feet deep, and you're churning up.
right,
So, it was one of the reasons Joe's Pond is unique. The A&R said in its filing that wake boats had to have a 3,000-foot straight shot to operate. And they said, but in all the 50 contiguous acres in the state, they have that shot. Well, they don't on Joe's Pond.
huh,
If you look at a map, and
yep,
we've got a 2,200-foot straight shot.
oh, interesting,
So by their own science that they need 300,000 straight
it's not
feet,
there,
they should prohibit wake sports on Joe's Pond because you can't get that.
right,
And if it's not a long enough run, it's more likely that they're going to go outside the zone.
there you go. We have about a minute and a half left. Would you like to sort of talk to our listeners, our viewers, and encourage them to participate?
Diane is so elegant. I'm going to give her the last minute and a half.
There you go,
Oh,
Diane.
you got to be kidding me.
You can do it. Bring it home.
I have spent a good part of my afternoon. We asked the people submitting comments to A&R to copy the association on their comments. And I think that the people on my team are probably tearing their hair out now with all the emails I've sent them this afternoon. The response has been wonderful, and these letters are heartfelt. I would encourage anybody who is concerned about preserving what we have. And one of our arguments is it's not wrong to want to preserve the culture that you have in your community. We preserve these things so that people have these places to go to. And when they're gone, they're gone. So in Westmore, we are actively working to protect these things that are drawing these hordes of visitors to Westmore. I would ask people throughout the state, people who visit the state for their vacations and who treasure these experiences, to write a short note to A&R and tell them we need to do more. We need to do more to preserve these opportunities for the public at large,
That's great.
and to preserve their ability to participate in these types of recreation safely.
Well said. I hope you all listening to this. So we're going to post where you need to write at the end of the video. I want to thank my guest, Diane Lehder. Leader. Sorry, Diane. And David Kidney. I really appreciate you both, and thank you very much for fighting the good fight. We're going to keep track of this.
Thank you so much
thank you.
for all
Thank
you're
you for
doing.
having
Thank
us,
you very
Pat.
much. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites.